Hi, I'm Shanley, and this is the story of how my sister threw me a birthday party without me in it. There were flowers, speeches, champagne, guests clapped, cameras flashed, but I wasn't listed on the welcome sign, and my name tag? Misspelled, labeled as guest of Leora. Then she got on stage and said I was nothing, and the crowd laughed like they'd been waiting for permission. But the part no one expected was when her boss showed up, walked right past her, and called me Maimin front of everyone. So how did we get from that cake-cutting smile to a public reckoning? Let me show you. The first thing I noticed was that my name wasn't anywhere. Not on the welcome board, not on the dessert table, not even on the tiny menu cards lined up across each polished plate. There were signs that read, "Celebrate with Leora," floral initials on every cocktail napkin, and even a decorative monogram in rose gold balloons LM floating behind the main table. It was my 40th birthday, yet everything around me screamed hers. I stood near the side of the garden for a few minutes, scanning the sea of smiling faces. The breeze carried the scent of lavender and roasted garlic, and the sound of clinking wine glasses layered beneath a soft playlist of curated piano covers. Leora had spared no expense, and no detail felt unintentional. That was her style, elegant, controlled, and always centered around her. As guests began filing in, they all naturally gravitated toward her, like moths to a chandelier. She welcomed them with that polished grin, the one she perfected back when she was the face of every school fundraiser and neighborhood committee. People didn't notice me at first. That wasn't new. A few eventually greeted me with polite hugs, but even those were quick, distracted. One woman, a former co-worker of my sister, stilted her head and asked, "Are you helping with coordination tonight?" Leora mentioned she hired some extra support. I smiled and nodded. What else could I do? Correct her in the middle of a catered compliment? I slipped further into the background, letting my eyes take in the spectacle. The floral arrangements were peonies and dahlias, my mother's favorites, not mine. The cake? Triple-tiered and white with gold trim. Leora's wedding aesthetic recycled with zero irony. The DJ even played the same playlist she used at her engagement party. It wasn't just a birthday party. It was a performance, and I was a prop. Then came the glass tap. Leora stood center stage, her hand delicately tapping the edge of her wine glass with a fork. The music softened. Conversations paused. She smiled and raised her voice just enough for effect. This evening isn't just about the years we celebrate, it's about the people who shape us. I've been so lucky to have my sister, Shanley, by my side. Or, more accurately, behind me, she said, chuckling lightly. People laughed. She's always been the quiet one, she went on. But quietly strong, I guess. I mean, none of us thought she'd figure it out. But here she is. Another round of laughter. Louder this time. My smile tightened. I looked down at the napkin in my hand and traced the embossed initials. I didn't even remember sitting down. The moment played out in slow motion, like I was watching someone else get publicly dressed down under the pretense of being honored. The woman at the table beside me leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Wasn't Shanley a teacher or something?" "She used to be," he replied. "I think she does, online workshops now." "Local stuff." Leora, standing nearby and sipping her champagne, turned her head just enough and added, "Oh, she's not really in that world anymore. Mostly just helps with some classes. But she's doing her best." A pause. Her tone was syrupy and kind, the kind of kindness you use when you know someone can't call you out without seeming bitter. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard it pulsed. My cousin leaned over and asked, half whispering, "Wait, this is your birthday, right?" I nodded. "Yeah, surprise." After that, I stopped responding. I stopped explaining. I smiled when people spoke to me, nodded when they complimented the lighting or the wine selection, none of which I had any hand in. I was a guest at my own birthday, but worse, I was invisible until summoned for humiliation. Eventually, I excused myself, stepping into the powder room that opened just off the garden. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time before reaching for my lipstick. The soft hum of conversation floated in through the wall, as if the party was happening in another dimension. I reapplied the color slowly, more out of ritual than vanity, then stared at my reflection. "You came here knowing this would happen," I said to myself quietly. "Why did you expect something different?" The answer didn't come, just a breath that got stuck in my chest. I dabbed a tear from under one eye before it could smudge. That, too, had become a practiced motion. I looked at myself a moment longer, adjusted the collar of my dress, and squared my shoulders. They saw me as nothing I whispered, voice steady now. But they forgot, nothing doesn't stay quiet forever. When I stepped out from the bathroom, the sky had already shifted to that amber-pink hue that makes Scottsdale feel like a postcard someone forgot to mail. The scent of grilled lemon chicken lingered in the air, and clusters of guests now hovered around the garden bar and dessert table. I tucked my lipstick back into my clutch, pasted the most neutral expression I could manage, and slid back into the current of small talk and polished teeth. Before I even reached the main patio, a distant aunt, I think from my dad's side, one of those women who always wore too much perfume and knew too little about the people she spoke to, awed me over with her flute of Prosecco. "Oh, Shanley, everything's just lovely," she cooed. "You did such a wonderful job helping Leora pull this together." I gave her a polite nod. "Glad you're enjoying it," I said. I didn't correct her. What would have been the point? The room I was raised in taught me early when someone erases your role, they're never interested in rewriting it with you. They want you gone quietly, preferably with a smile. I moved toward the dining area, where a large projector had just been set up, its white sheet glowing in anticipation. The MC clapped twice. "Let's take a trip down memory lane," he announced. "A family favorite, The Morrisons Through the Years." The video began with Leora's baby pictures. Of course it did. Her first dance recital, her school awards, her high school prom. Then came the family vacations, smiling by the lake, posing under fireworks, Thanksgiving table shots. I watched photo after photo roll by. Leora in matching mother-daughter dresses. Leora on dad's shoulders. Leora in a college cap and gown. Leora with her husband holding baby Zadie. I was in one photo. I was 7. We were on a playground, and I was halfway cut out of frame. That was it. No images of me graduating magna cum laude. No snapshots from when I taught in Berlin. Nothing from the non-profit I helped launch. Not even the blurry one I knew Mom had saved from my doctoral defense, where I looked exhausted but proud in full academic regalia. It wasn't that they forgot me. It was that they didn't want me there. The silence around me deepened, not because anyone noticed, but because no one did. My absence wasn't accidental, it was curated. And then came the voice. "Are you the lady who made the cake?" Zadie stood beside me, cupcake icing smeared on her chin. She looked up, chewing slowly, like the question wasn't strange at all. I crouched beside her, forcing a smile. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "I used to teach people who run bakeries." She blinked, unimpressed. "Mom said you bake sometimes." "At home." I nodded. "Sometimes." With that, she shrugged and skipped off. There it was. Legacy, reduced to pastry. That's what happens when silence goes unchecked for too long. The next generation picks up the edited story, and they never think to ask who left the pages blank. I turned away from the screen and walked toward the back hedges where it was quieter. That's when I saw Verlin, standing by the lavender bushes with a drink in her hand. She met my eyes, but didn't move. She smiled soft, tight-lipped, but stayed put. I didn't expect her to do anything else. People clapped as the video ended. I didn't. Instead, I watched Leora bow her head as if she'd won an award, then lean in to whisper something to one of her PR friends, the kind of woman who said power move as often as she said thank you. I stood there, detached from it all, yet strangely present. The bitterness I thought I'd feel never arrived. What came instead was a quiet clarity, the kind that settles deep in your bones. You can spend years earning your seat at the table, but if they never planned to set a place for you, it doesn't mean you failed. It means they were blind, willfully. As I moved toward the refreshment table, weaving between tipsy cousins and bored spouses, a voice stopped me. "Excuse me." It was low, calm. "I believe we've met before. Years ago. You probably don't remember me, but I remember you." I turned. The man had gray at his temples and a calm energy that felt grounded, steady. I didn't recognize him immediately, but something in his eyes triggered a flicker in my memory. And in that moment, I remembered exactly where I'd seen him and why everything was about to change. I hadn't taken more than 3 steps from the dessert table when I heard the voice again, this time warmer, more familiar than just polite curiosity. "Dr. Morrison, you might not remember me, but you changed the trajectory of my life." I turned. Lucian, my former student from a decade ago, now standing taller, older, and far more composed than the teenager I once coached through his senior thesis on constitutional ethics. I hadn't seen him since his confirmation hearing on public service reform, but the eyes were unmistakable, steady, clear, and kind. "You told me something once," he continued, "that the world doesn't always clap for what holds it up. I never forgot that." I offered a faint smile. I probably said it to remind myself, too. We spoke quietly for a minute, about his work, my silence, and the irony of the evening. He didn't need to say more. Just standing there beside me, Lucian gave me back something no one else here had offered: recognition without agenda. Before I could say thank you, Verlin approached. Her heels clicked against the stone as she walked slowly, cautiously, holding a pale blue envelope in both hands. "I didn't want to bring this," she said, voice low, "but after seeing the slideshow, I think you should have it." I looked at the envelope, already brittle at the corners. My name, Shanley, was written in my mother's handwriting. My mother, who passed 5 years ago. I took it carefully, like it might shatter. "I found it when I was cleaning out the boxes after she died," Verlin said. "She left it with her jewelry, labeled for your 35th. I meant to give it to you then, but, well, Leora said it wasn't the right time, that it might stir things." My throat clenched. "And 5 years later is better timing?" She winced. "You know how she gets when I do." I turned away from her, walked to the side of the garden, and opened the letter slowly. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were still clear. "My Shanley, I know I never understood your choices. I wish I'd known how to support you without questioning everything. You were always the quiet one, the careful one. But that doesn't mean you were ever weak. You have a way of holding the weight of everyone without asking for applause. And I realize now how much of your light we dimmed because we didn't understand it. You were never small. We just refused to see the size of your light. I love you. I always did. Am sorry I didn't say it better when it counted. Mom, I read it 3 times. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I did. And it hurt more than I expected." When I turned back, Verlin was still standing nearby. I held the letter up gently. "You read this?" She nodded. "And you still thought I didn't deserve to know?" "It wasn't that. It was just Leora thought it might distract from what? Her brand?" I didn't yell. I didn't need to. My voice was quiet and low, but even Verlin stepped back. It's always her timeline, her image, her comfort. I lost my mother, and she managed to make even that revolve around her. She looked down, hands folding into themselves. "I'm sorry." I folded the letter back along the original creases. "Thank you for giving it to me now," I said, voice flat. "But you should know I'm not going to be quiet anymore." I left her standing there and walked back toward the main patio. The lights had dimmed slightly, and groups of guests were chatting casually over coffee and petit fours. I wasn't ready to join them, but I wasn't hiding anymore either. As I passed the entrance table again, something caught my eye. The seating chart. ID skimmed it earlier out of obligation, not emotion. But this time, I looked closer. My name was handwritten in black marker, not printed like the others, not in calligraphy, and it wasn't even in alphabetical order. I traced my name to the table list. There I was, table 12, right next to the catering entrance and opposite the restroom. I smiled, bitter and dry, Of course. This wasn't oversight. This was structure. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't carelessness. This was orchestration. The air was cooling as the lights strung across the garden flickered on one by one, casting soft halos over the crowd. I moved toward the welcome table again, my eyes drawn to the oversized seating chart leaning on an easel next to a vase of pink hydrangeas. It was the same chart I had ignored earlier, still pretending that none of this mattered. But now, after the letter from my mother, after finding my name scribbled in pen at the edge of that page, I needed to know what else had been done in the shadows. I scanned the chart slowly, each name printed in elegant gold calligraphy. Clean lines, perfect spacing, guests assigned with careful attention, Leora's board members seated together, her husband's colleagues close to the band, and influencers from her last campaign seated front and center. But Rai's name wasn't there. Neither was Miras. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a message thread I hadn't opened since Wednesday. Ray had sent me a meme. Something about women who quietly run empires. We always joked that one day we'd start our own. I typed a quick text. "Hey, just noticed you're not here." "All okay?" Her reply came fast. "Yeah. Leora told me it was a small family gathering. Didn't want to overstep. I thought you changed your mind." I didn't respond. I stared at the words until they lost shape. She hadn't forgotten. She was told to stay away. My fingers went cold. Not out of surprise, but recognition. It was never just about spotlight. It was about control. And control always starts by choosing who's allowed to witness. A voice behind me said, "She really outdid herself this time, huh?" I turned slightly. It was a cousin I barely knew. He nodded toward the decor. "Everything looks so elegant. Leora's amazing at this kind of thing. You're lucky to have a sister who cares this much." I managed a small smile. "Yeah, real lucky." I walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. Near the hedge, I spotted Verlin holding a glass of rose, eyes scanning the crowd like she was counting exit routes. I walked straight up to her. "Did you know Ray and Mira were told not to come?" She hesitated. Yes, but it wasn't personal. Leora said she didn't want distractions." "Distractions," I echoed. "You mean my oldest friends? The ones who actually know me?" She said it was a family-centered evening. She didn't want to make things messy. I didn't think it was my place to interfere. It's my birthday. Verlin looked down. "Still, it's a beautiful gathering. The food, the flowers, I mean. Come on, Shanley. You should be grateful, sweetie." There it was. I inhaled slowly, held it, and let it out without a word for a few seconds. Then I leaned in, just close enough so she could hear every syllable. "Stop calling it generosity when it's control." She blinked. Her jaw shifted like she wanted to explain, but couldn't. Or wouldn't. "You know what this is," I said. "You've always known." She didn't deny it. Instead, she looked down at her drink like the ice was more interesting than the mess in front of her. I stepped back and straightened my dress. "I've played along long enough," I said. "But I won't keep letting people smile at my erasure like it's courtesy." Then I turned, leaving her to sip her fear and excuses. I was halfway across the lawn when I felt someone watching. I glanced up. Lucian stood near the dessert table, arms crossed loosely, glass in hand. He raised it slightly when our eyes met. A simple gesture, quiet but deliberate. "You're not crazy. I see it too." I nodded, a silent agreement passing between us. If they wanted to pretend I didn't belong here, maybe it was time to remind them why I did. By the time the dessert trays were being wheeled out, flammed tarts still smoking, tiny pistachio cakes glistening under soft lights, the sky had surrendered to a bruised navy, edged with the faintest pink like the memory of something tender. The last strains of the string quartet dissolved into the air as the musicians quietly packed away their instruments. There was a hush, the kind that only falls when bellies are full, wine glasses are half empty, and the masks start to slip. The courtyard was dim now, lit by golden bulbs strung from olive trees and the tall heat lamps that cast flickering halos around the guests. Laughter had faded into murmurs, low and syrupy, as people clustered into familiar circles, executives in one corner, the politically adjacent in another. The scent of burnt sugar and blooming roses lingered in the air, sweet and almost too nostalgic. I stood quietly near a heater, letting its warmth graze my arms, half listening to two finance guys rehash the rise and fall of crypto like they were narrating a war they never fought in. Their voices rose and fell with a lazy arrogance. I was ready to leave. And then I heard it. "Shanley," came the voice. Smooth, confident, familiar. "Colton." He strode over like he was entering a boardroom he owned. Same half smirk, same whiskey in hand, swirling like it had stock options. He stopped a few feet from me, lifted his glass slightly, as if in salute. "Word is you've taken a step back from the academic grind," he said, his tone casual but laced with condescension. "If you're open to something with more, flexibility, I might be able to get you a place at my firm. Light hours, decent paycheck, something easy." I turned slowly to face him. My expression defaulted to pleasant, my lips parting into a practiced smile I hadn't used in years. "Flexible?" I repeated lightly, tilting my head, like folding chairs at someone else's table. He laughed, assuming I was flirting. "Exactly." My smile didn't move, but it tightened. "Colton, I've reviewed 3 of your firm's compliance reports this quarter." His glass froze mid-swish. "I red flagged 2 of them, one of which I'll be discussing with your audit lead on Tuesday." He blinked. I let the silence stretch just enough before delivering the next line. "Last year, I cleared over $15 million in federal STEM grants. My base salary is 6 times what you make, and that's before international consults." His lips parted slightly. No words came out. Behind him, a woman, perhaps a political donor's wife, tilted toward her partner and whispered something. I caught fragments. Compliance reports 6 times and a quiet, shocked laugh. Colton recovered, barely. His smirk returned, but it had lost its center. "Well, good for you." "Thank you," I said, calm and even. "I worked for it." Right then, as if summoned by her own ego or the scent of a PR opportunity, Leora drifted into view. She slid next to Colton, her hand looping through his arm with that mechanical grace she'd perfected over the years. "Everything all right here?" she asked, eyes not on me, but already dismissing me. "Just fine," I replied, folding my arms. "I was simply reminding your husband not to judge the size of someone's shoes based on how quietly they walk." Leora's lips curled into that smile she always used when cameras were nearby, the one that moved her mouth but not her eyes. "Let's keep things light, Shanley. It's a party." I tilted my head slowly. "Light doesn't mean small. You, of all people, should understand that." For a brief moment, her face almost cracked. Just a flicker, something unscripted and real. She opened her mouth, then thought better of it. Instead, she smoothed down her dress with polished fingers and whispered something sharp into Colton's ear. I didn't catch it. I didn't care. I walked away before they could trap me again in a web of champagne-flavored condescension. And as I moved through the crowd, something changed. People turned. Not with curiosity, but with recognition. Not because Leora had walked by. Not because someone had shouted or cried or laughed too loud. But because I had said something, and I hadn't apologized. For the first time that night, my voice had weight. And people felt it. I passed the dessert table. My hand brushed a tray of rosewater macarons I didn't take. Across the fountain, I caught Lucian's eye. He stood beside one of the stone pillars, half in shadow. He didn't smile. He just nodded, small, subtle, quiet. But I felt it like a second breath in my lungs. I turned toward the small stage set up near the edge of the courtyard. The microphone stood untouched, silver and waiting, like a question mark daring someone to answer it. I wasn't sure what I'd say yet, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The weight in this room had shifted, and for the first time in a long while, it wasn't tipping toward her. The energy in the room had shifted, And not just because the wine had started to thin out. It was the kind of hush that happens when people start to sense something real might be about to break through the performance. The dessert trays had been picked clean. The ambient jazz was soft enough to overhear side whispers, and Leora was stepping into the center of it all again. She cleared her throat with the ease of someone who'd done this many times before. Before we close the evening, she said, I want to share something special. She motioned toward the oversized novelty check propped beside the gift table. On behalf of our family, we've made a donation to the Next Tech Women's Initiative, supporting underrepresented girls in tech. Polite applause followed. Cameras clicked. Her name was printed in bold gold across the mock check. Mine was scribbled underneath in ballpoint ink, lower right-hand corner. Slanted. Almost like an afterthought. A footnote to her headline. I didn't move. I didn't clap. I simply stared at it. The same way you stare at a familiar knife in someone else's hand. A few guests glanced in my direction, expecting gratitude, or at the very least, participation. Instead, I walked slowly over to the display table. There, just beneath the check, was a printed banner featuring the logo for the Next Tech Initiative, a program ID helped build from the ground up. Shanley? A voice said behind me. I turned to see one of the nonprofit's directors, a woman I'd met years ago at a national equity summit. She beamed and took my hand in both of hers. I can't believe we're seeing you here. You're the reason I got involved in this work. Thank you for everything you've built. I nodded. It's good to see you too. Behind her, a murmur passed like static through the crowd. Leora didn't move. Her smile froze midair. Then came the next act. The MC returned to the mic. Now, a short tribute video sent in by Dr. Morrison's colleagues, students, and... He paused. Looked off stage. Actually, give us 1 second, we're having a small technical hiccup. A few chuckles. The room turned expectant. A moment passed. Then another. No video. The MC cleared his throat. We may have to skip. No, I said, stepping forward. I have it. I pulled my phone from my clutch, opened the file, and walked up to the small screen set up beside the stage. Would you mind? I asked the tech assistant, who nodded and plugged in the cable. The screen lit up. First came a retired Air Force general, then a state senator, then a dozen former students, young women in lab coats, startup founders, nonprofit directors, one after the other saying the same thing. She believed in me before I knew how. She made room for people like me in rooms I didn't think I belonged in. Because of her, I didn't quit. A hush fell again, deeper this time. This wasn't fluff. This was substance. This wasn't performance. It was proof. When the video ended, no one clapped right away. The pause said more than the applause that eventually followed. I stepped up to the mic. Not to explain, not to boast, just to finish what had already begun. Thank you, I said. Not for the applause, but for finally listening. Then I stepped back. Leora was standing near the back of the crowd. Her jaw was tight, her hand gripping the stem of her wineglass just a little too firmly. Colton stood beside her, shifting his weight between his feet, like a child trying to disappear. I didn't need to say anything else. I'd already said enough. As I moved past the buffet, a catering assistant leaned toward me and whispered, They tried to pull the video, said it was too long. I'm glad you played it. I met her eyes. So am I. The video wasn't the only thing they tried to erase, but I was done letting them succeed. By the time I stepped toward the garden stage, the mood had shifted into something brittle. People lingered near the perimeter of light, drinks in hand, quiet and expectant, like they were waiting for someone else to break the silence. Leora didn't wait. She stood near the center, champagne in one hand, that polished grin in place. Her voice rang out just above the hum of background music. Before we all call it a night, I wanted to end on something light, something fun. I knew the tone before the sentence finished. She glanced toward me, like it was all in good fun. Remember Shanley dropped my wedding cake? 3 tiers of buttercream and drama. A few scattered laughs, unsure. She was 19, I think. But she's come a long way since then. She raised her glass slightly. We're proud of her. They chuckled, those who weren't sure if they were supposed to. But I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. There was no joke in the delivery, no affection in the memory. She weaponized a past mistake, framed in the pretense of praise. And it worked, like it always did until it didn't. I turned and walked toward the entry table. My legs moved before my thoughts caught up. That familiar surge was back, not rage, but clarity. The name tags were still there in their neat rows. Gold print, thick cardstock, matching ribbon. I scanned until I found mine, or what was supposed to be mine. Sharnley Morrison, guest of Leora. Wrong spelling, wrong role, wrong everything. It was the only card handwritten in pen, smudged slightly, curled at the edges. I held it up and didn't move, just waited. And that's when they noticed. One by one, heads began to tilt. Conversations slowed. A few people glanced at each other, unsure. Some looked away. The MC returned to the microphone, oblivious or pretending to be. Now, a few words from our birthday guest. Please welcome Miss Morrison, former teacher and sister of the host. That was it. I stepped up to the mic and took it from him without hesitation. It's Dr. Morrison, I said slowly. But you knew that, didn't you? The MC blinked, nodded slightly, and stepped back. I scanned the crowd, no notes, no nerves. Just years of being spoken over, spoken for, or simply not spoken of. My name's been misspelled, my title ignored, my voice edited. But tonight, I decided I wouldn't leave here without making at least one correction. People stood still, hands wrapped around half-empty glasses. Leora shifted at the edge of the tent, the smile on her face now tighter, stretched too thin. I want to thank those of you who actually saw me not just tonight, but ever. Not because I'm a sister. Not because I showed up quietly for every baby shower and photo shoot and fundraiser you needed help with, but because I'm here. I've always been here. I paused. The wind caught the hem of my dress. The quiet held. I don't need your applause. I just needed to stop being edited. Some nodded. Others looked at Leora. Colton was pale. Verlin's eyes were glassy. I handed the mic back, not waiting for permission. As I stepped down, the sound system crackled softly, but no one said a word. I walked past the dessert table where a couple stood whispering. One leaned toward the other and said, "She should have been the one hosting. I heard it." And for the first time tonight, I let it land. Because they were right, so when Judge Abbott finally walked through the gate, he didn't just greet me, he acknowledged who I truly was. The crowd had begun to settle again, the buzz of the last exchange trailing behind me like perfume that lingered too long. But the party wasn't over, at least, not for everyone. There were still guests arriving, and as the gate opened, one more name was announced by the staff near the entrance. Judge Robert Yvette, chair of the State Ethics Board. I turned just as Leora did. She moved fast, like a hostess who just spotted a camera crew, all polished teeth and open arms. "Judge! What a lovely surprise," she said, stepping forward, hand extended before his foot even hit the pavement. But he didn't take her hand. He walked right past her. "Dr. Morrison," he said, with a firm nod in my direction. "Mom, it's good to see you again." The conversation around us thinned to whispers. I took a step forward and returned the nod. "Likewise, Judge, I didn't expect to see you tonight. I wasn't planning to stop by," he said, eyes briefly sweeping the crowd, "until I saw the list of contributors tied to the nonprofit you're backing." "Ah," I smiled. "The one my sister announced 10 minutes ago, like she built it herself?" He chuckled once, just enough. "You were always the real scaffolding, Dr. Morrison. Some of us never forget who held up the walls." I led him toward the back patio, and as we passed the seating chart on the way, he paused, frowning. "Is this where they sat you?" he asked, pointing to the tiny card next to the restroom corridor. "Table 12? Apparently it was fitting." He scoffed quietly. "Not for someone with your clearance level." His tone didn't carry, but his meaning landed. Two nearby guests, one a partner at a law firm, the other a local judge, whispered to each other, eyes following us as we moved past the buffet. We stood near a garden urn, where the fairy lights cast soft shadows across the grass. I introduced him to a few people, each handshake shifting the atmosphere a little more. I didn't seek Leora out, but I felt her watching. The tightness in her posture betrayed her composure. "This is Dr. Morrison," Avett said at one point to a cluster of business donors. "We've worked closely on several federal reforms in the last 3 years. Impeccable judgment, even under political pressure." The crowd's gaze turned from him to me. I nodded politely, smiled when I needed to, but made no effort to smooth anything over. I had no interest in performance anymore. From the edge of my vision, Leora approached. "Judge," she began, forcing the word out sweetly. "So glad you could join us." He gave a polite nod. It was worth the detour. Leora turned to me, a smile stretched too tight. "Shanley, I didn't realize your work had expanded into that sphere." I looked at her directly. "You never wanted to." She blinked. "I know that sounds harsh, but it's true," I said, voice calm. "And that's okay. But from this point on, you won't be able to pretend otherwise." Her mouth opened slightly, as if searching for a way to reset the moment. I didn't wait for her to find it. I stepped back into the open area, conversation resuming around me, but never quite returning to what it had been. Something had shifted, and not just in the way they looked at me, but in the way she could no longer stop it. A few minutes later, standing near the dessert bar, I pulled out my phone and opened my inbox. A new email glowed on the screen. Subject: Congressional Hearing Request to Speak. "Dr. Morrison," it read, "We'd be honored to have you as a panel expert for our ethics hearing next month. Judge Avett spoke highly of your contributions and recommended you personally." I didn't smile. Instead, I looked around the crowd. Faces blurred into each other. Laughter in the distance, clinks of glasses still echoing from the bar. But I stood still. Then I looked down at the name tag still clutched in my palm. It read, "Shanley Morrison, guest of Leora." It wasn't just my name they tried to erase. It was my future they feared. The morning light slipped through the windows without asking permission, gentle but firm, like someone who knew their place in the world and didn't need validation to take it. I sat on the terrace of my apartment, the steam from my coffee curling upward like a quiet exhale. Below me, the city stirred, slow and unsure, still waking. It'd been up since dawn, not out of restlessness, but readiness. There's a kind of silence that feels earned, not empty, not lonely, just whole. I picked up my phone and began scrolling through my inbox, not with any urgency, just out of habit. Most of it was the usual: policy memos, committee threads, scheduling requests. But then, mid-swipe, I saw it. A video file. No subject line, just a thumbnail freeze frame of me standing at the podium last night. I tapped it. It was my speech. Apparently, someone in the crowd had recorded the entire thing and shared it. And someone else had clipped the moment Judge Avett turned toward me and said, with absolute seriousness and no hesitation, "Thank you, Mom." Dozens of comments followed. "Who is she? Not your average birthday toast." This woman silenced a room full of CEOs without raising her voice. I should have clicked away. I usually did. But then, as if the universe was nudging me, a new email slid in. From Zadie. Subject: Sorry. The body contained just one sentence. "I didn't know you helped people like that. I'm sorry, I thought you just made cake." I stared at it for a long time. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't anymore. That tiny, awkward apology meant more than all the polished public compliments I'd received this year. It came from someone who had been spoon-fed a false version of me, and for the first time, chose to look again. And believe her own eyes. No message from Leora, no late-night call, not even a courtesy text from her assistant. But Verlin had forwarded something else, an article from a local blog, already circulating with quiet buzz by breakfast. Birthday backfire? Family event exposes power shift. There were no names mentioned, but everyone knew. A high-profile event took a dramatic turn when a surprise guest took the mic and the narrative. Sources close to the family suggest the evening marked more than a celebration. It marked a reckoning. I didn't ask who leaked it. Maybe it was a guest who'd seen too many curated lies. Or maybe someone finally got tired of watching a crown passed between hands that didn't earn it. Another message followed, this one short and direct from Verlene. She's taking personal time. Just so you know, I read it twice. Then said aloud, to no one in particular, good. Not with spite, but with a kind of release. Sometimes silence isn't passive, it's protective. And distance is rejection, it's recovery. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was from Lucian. He'd attached a photo, a printed brief from a federal judiciary hearing. Look who they're quoting today, his message read. There it was. My name, Dr. Shanley Morrison, listed under expert advisors, federal oversight reform. No headline, no fanfare, just truth. And finally, recognition not built on applause, but on impact. I rose from my chair and walked into the study. On my bookshelf, tucked between volumes on ethics law and a memoir from a woman I once shared a panel with, was the letter. Mom's letter. The envelope was still soft at the edges, creased by time. Her handwriting, the kind you didn't mistake, felt like a whisper across years. I unfolded it, not to ache, but to anchor. You were never small. We just refused to see the size of your light. This time, I let myself believe it. No conditions, no questions. I folded it back carefully and placed it where it belonged, between stories of courage and systems I'd helped to challenge. Almost as if timed, another email arrived. You've been confirmed to speak at the National Women in Governance Summit. Judge Abbott will open the panel. You will follow immediately after. I clicked accept without hesitation. There was nothing left to prove, nothing left to ask for. I was no longer chasing inclusion from people committed to misunderstanding me. My name was no longer a question mark in rooms that had always known the answer. The view outside stretched wide past towers, across treetops, beyond the names that once whispered over me like limits. They used to say I was too quiet. They missed that quiet is where revolutions begin. Sometimes being underestimated isn't a weakness, it's a shield, a cocoon, a place to build without interruption. And silence? Silence isn't surrender. It's strategy, and mine had just paid off.